Perfect. No. Okay, we'll go ahead and call this Urban Renewal Agency meeting to order. It's Wednesday, February 7th. The time is 6 p.m. I am the vice chair is on Councilor Chilton is our vice chair. She's asked me to fill in because she's remote and not feeling well. So we have a consent agenda for approval, which would be the draft minutes. It is April 6th, 2022.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda for draft minutes dated April 6th, 2022.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded to approve consent agenda for approval. We'll go ahead and go with Council President Chilton.
Chilton, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, okay. It wasn't letting me. So thank you. Aye.
Okay. Sandy? Aye. Jefferson? Aye. Hubbard? Aye. And I as well. Okay, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. If you'd like to come up, state your name for the record and keep it 3 minutes or less.
Yeah, I don't want your love. I don't want your 60s, stoner theory things that I'm not interested. In fact, you can all hate me. What would actually prefer that? My job is not to be your friend or your buddy or in love with you. My job is to hold you accountable. And I will continue to do that. And if you don't like it, again, any of you feel free to walk out the door because that's your job. And if you don't like it, you probably picked the wrong job. You've not done a good job, frankly. You're one of the few councils that's paid in this entire state of Oregon, and you're not doing a good job. You have Mr. Sundin, who talks about people being able to go to McDonald's was paying on the water bill. Wasn't happy about that. There's not one of you that I was happy with. Mr. Gunderson thinks that we should have a vote, but only accept it if it agrees with what they want. And if they don't agree with us, we're just going to ignore it and do it anyhow. Russ Hubbard has had tons of conflicts that he doesn't want to disclose and sits there and gets money from an organization whose job that has deliberately tried to take money from tourism and thinks that he shouldn't disclose any of that information. And yeah, I think it's pretty despicable. And then we haven't even talked about the dirty dirt deal, which is still sitting there on a piece of property we're never going to use for a police station that's probably not going to be built there. And then you approve a measure that isn't going to give us enough money to solve the police station, which we don't need a new one, but you could have done an $8 or $9 million levy that we could fix the police station and remodel it and not build a new one and stop the illegal tax on the water bill, which you didn't do. And so instead, we're going to continue to have an illegal bill on our water bill and a levy. And if you think that people are going to pass it, I think they're not. I think if you had a levy that says, oh, this will get rid of the water bill, I think it would pass. But now that you're going to do both, I don't think it's going to pass. And then not only are they going to do both, if you don't pass the levy, we're going to just change your water bill amount anyhow. To me, that's ridiculous. And I don't even understand the logic of it. And of course, I don't understand why you're still here, frankly, because you sat there and said that you couldn't even understand that wouldn't vote on a measure to change the amounts of the ordinance that you just voted on changing the rate. I don't understand how you cannot understand. It's like, I didn't understand that. Why are we going to vote on? I don't have enough information to change the numbers when you voted on increasing the rate that you couldn't understand that you got to change the rest of the descriptions. It's like, what's the matter with you people?
Great. State your name for the record.
Steve Koski. Thank you, Mayor Scholl. So I had some questions for the Urban Renewal Agency. I'm just curious how much debt potentially we can borrow, and then what the mechanism is before we go forward with borrowing the debt. I'm a little confused about the reporting of numbers concerning the amounts that have been spent, because I thought that our construction project on the roads was being financed by urban renewal debt. And then maybe I missed it, but I thought that I did not see where urban renewal had borrowed money to pay for the roads project, so I'm asking for clarity on that. Also, I would like to have the urban renewal agency take up budgeting during the planning process. Trying to get the planning commission involved in budgeting. We've got $5 million estimates, 3 different estimates on the Riverwalk project, and $600,000 spent on architects already on the Riverwalk project. And I think people are a little surprised by how much that project ended up costing when it finally got to bid. And I think some looking a little more before going to bidding is a better way to do it. When I look at some of the projects that we're undertaking, I see tens of millions of dollars. And, you know, these are the drawings, and I remember being at one of the meetings with the architects discussing about the waterfront, and I said, this all looks good, but this looks like $15 million worth of just infrastructure. How's that gonna be paid for? And he kind of shrugged his shoulders. So I think that a little more money management. We've got a lot of money potentially we're gonna borrow, a lot of money that we're potentially gonna spend. And some mechanisms for money management would be worthwhile to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other visitor comments? I'm not seeing any, and I think some of Mr. Kosky's questions will be answered here shortly. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and go with the selection of chair and vice chair. I would like to recommend that that Council President Chilton, who's the vice chair, come into chair, and then I was kind of leaning towards Mark for you would take the position of vice chair.
I can commit to that, Greg. I don't, with all the other things I've got going on,
Okay.
fire and rescue, I just don't.
We meet basically once or twice a year, okay? Sometimes it'll be a little bit more. The reason I think Russ has expressed that he's just filling in, so, you know, and you have some time under your term. I'm trying to get either one of you guys to do that, vice chair.
If Mark isn't interested, then I feel like this is brand new for me. There's a lot here that I need to learn.
Yeah.
So I still feel like.
And we will be having updates on urban renewal. Good. Promise you that. So I appreciate that. So I think we have a chair, Councilor Chilton as chair and Councilor Sundin as vice chair. Any discussion on it? Okay, do I need to make I kind of made a motion. Do we need a second for that? Probably should. Second that. Okay, Council President Chilton or Chairman Chilton?
Chair lady, okay?
Chair lady, I apologize.
Aye.
All right, Vice Chairman Sundin?
Aye.
Okay, Gunderson?
Hi.
Hubbard? Aye. And I as well. Okay, urban renewal basics and upcoming budget process presentation.
All right,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, thank you. Hopefully, by the time we're done with this presentation, you have a good, better understanding of how urban renewal works, operates, and it's really not surprising that you don't know that much about it because we haven't had it in the past for 3 of the 5 members of the council or the agency. This is a meeting where we're switching our city council hats off and putting the agency director hats on, so. We've brought Elaine Howard. Elaine is, the recognized expert around the state, helping
That's right.
most every community in the state with their urban renewal planning, if not all. And we're here to learn and answer questions and do a deep dive on our plan and how it all works.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, for
Yes, I'm Elaine Howard. I helped write your plan a few years ago. I wasn't the lead consultant, but I helped assist on the writing of the plan. I've been doing urban renewal consulting since 2006. And urban renewal consulting is all that my firm does. We don't do the economics planning, or we don't do zone changing or any of that. We concentrate on urban renewal. And as John says, we do urban renewal really across the state. I like to say from Astoria to Pendleton to Burns to Brookings and really everywhere in between. What I'm going to go over is what is urban renewal, how does urban renewal work, and what is the lifespan of urban renewal. I have no problem if you interrupt me during the presentation to ask a question. That won't interrupt my flow of the presentation at all. I might say I'm going to cover that in a subsequent slide, but I have no problem with you asking questions during the presentation. This is a map of cities with urban renewal across the state. You can see that up and down the coast, it is widely used with most of the cities. Same without the I-84 corridor and both that down the I-5 corridor. And then the little inset are urban renewal areas in the metropolitan area. So just in your local neighborhood, Scappoose also has an urban renewal area. Next. So what is urban renewal? Urban renewal is used throughout Oregon. It is by statutory definition supposed to address blighting influences in designated areas of a community. None of the cities who I work with like to call their cities blighted, and so that's kind of an offensive term. But the statute does have different conditions that have to be in existence for you to be able to establish an urban renewal area. And those conditions of blight generally are buildings that need to be upgraded or improved, infrastructure that needs to be installed, or a low investment to land ratio. So you either have properties that are underdeveloped or undeveloped, or property and that underdeveloped could be you have a parcel that's zoned for vertical development, but all you have are one-story buildings, so you aren't getting the amount of development within that particular zone that your zoning allows for. Urban renewal provides a financing mechanism. So a lot of times we adopt downtown plans or corridor plans, but they don't come with money. Urban renewal is unique in that it actually comes with a financing mechanism. And that is off of the increases in property taxes within the area that funds projects within the area. That increase in property taxes is not an increase in the tax bill. It is a division of taxes that are already paid. So if urban renewal would go away, that property tax bill would not decrease. The property taxes would go to the other taxing jurisdictions instead of going to the urban renewal area. And I'll explain more about that on slides to come. Urban renewal is different from your city budget, where urban renewal has what's called a maximum indebtedness. And that maximum indebtedness is established at the time you adopt an urban renewal plan. Every urban renewal plan in the state of Oregon has one. And it is a projection of the amount of money and a projection and a limit to the amount of money that you're allowed to spend within that urban renewal area over the life of the area. So the maximum indebtedness is the controlling feature of an urban renewal plan. Urban renewal plans are not controlled by a timeline unless the city decides they want to put a timeline in, but the statute that governs urban renewal does not require you to set a timeline. It requires that you establish a maximum indebtedness.
Ours, I don't know if you're gonna get to this.
We are.
Okay, never mind.
So again, here's what is blight. It's defined in the statute, and these three conditions are the conditions I think that we used in establishing your plan under development or utilization of property, poor condition of buildings, or inadequacy of infrastructure, including streets and utilities. Again, maximum indebtedness is the controlling feature of an urban renewal plan. Your maximum indebtedness is $62 million. That covers projects, programs, and if you charge any administration to the urban renewal plan. So if you enter into any contract for services, like me coming to do this presentation and you pay for that, that would come off of that maximum indebtedness that you have. If you do a project within the area, that project comes off of that maximum indebtedness. The way our statute is written, it says that maximum indebtedness can be accessed through debt. And that has been interpreted differently over the years. Urban renewal started in Oregon in 1959. So over the years, there have been different attorneys, I'm not an attorney, who have interpreted what that debt means. But the understanding now of what that debt means is that it can be a bond that is paid for off of the proceeds of those taxes that come into the urban renewal agency. It can be a line of credit with a local bank. It could be a loan from a local bank. It can be an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the urban renewal agency, or it can just be a commitment to pay, like a commitment to pay my services. I know that I'm coming here, I'm doing things, you will pay, that's a commitment to pay. That comes off of that $62 million amount. So in terms of you spending for large projects, you have not spent money on projects, you have not taken money to reimburse administration. I think you do have an obligation, an intergovernmental agreement on one project. And so in theory, even though it's not spent, you could say that it is an obligation against that maximum indebtedness. Slide. This is just a graphic that my staff put together about how urban renewal works. So in Oregon, we get our property tax bills in November. We pay that money to the assessor. The assessor pays that money to the jurisdictions like the city, the county, the school district, the community colleges. Our property taxes in Oregon increase really for only two reasons. We have a 3% limitation on our assessed value increases. And a lot of times I say this and then people will call me up and they'll say, Elaine, my tax bill's here and it's way above 3%. And I say, are you looking at real market value or assessed value? Because in Oregon, we have a very confusing tax system. Your real market value will go up more than 3%. That's not what you pay your taxes on. You pay your taxes on your assessed value, and it is limited to 3% increase every year unless there's new construction or substantial improvement, substantial rehabilitation. Then the assessor has the ability to reassess your property and those taxes go up. When you form an urban renewal area in a city, the property taxes within that area only, not all the city, but within that specific area, will any increases in those taxes from the time that that area is formed go to the urban renewal agency to do projects, programs, and pay for administration of that area. Next slide. So that blue bar shows that those increases are going to the urban renewal agency. At the time that the urban renewal area is formed, the assessor certifies what's called a certified tax base or a frozen base. That's the assessed value of all those properties at the time the urban renewal area is formed, and all the taxing districts continue receiving their money off of that amount of assessed value. That increase in assessed value and the taxes off of it go to the urban renewal agency. And that's why we call it a division of taxes, because part of that revenue stream off the taxes goes to the agency and part of that revenue stream goes to all the other taxing districts. Our school districts are treated differently. The taxes that are collected by the assessor, if you have an urban renewal area and that are collected, do go to the urban renewal agency, but the schools do not receive less funding because of that. The city receives less funding, the county receives less funding, the schools don't. And that's because they're funded through the state school fund, which is a fund that is comprised of the property taxes, but also income taxes and other kinds of federal monies. So we say that the state school fund is backfilled. The legislature establishes a per pupil amount. And if that can't be raised on property taxes alone, they're able to access these other funds to bring it to the amount that pays for that per pupil amount across the state. So any city that does or does not have urban renewal is not impacted, their schools are not impacted by urban renewal. That's for both the school district and the education service district. The community college is similar, but it's a separate fund. It's called the Community College Fund, and it's funded based on number of classes taken, but it also is backfilled at the state level. So to make an urban renewal area work, the area is designated as an urban renewal area by the city. The assessed value of all those properties is frozen. That doesn't mean it's really stops growing. It just means that frozen amount goes up to all the taxing districts. Taxes from that frozen base go to all the taxing districts, and increases above that go to the urban renewal agency. And this is the kind of weird part that is even more confusing. And it's that people would think logically that you would only see that on the tax bills for the properties that are in the urban renewal area, but that's not true. Every property within your city will have urban renewal as a line item on their property tax bill. And that doesn't mean that their property tax bill is increased by urban renewal. And it doesn't mean that if urban renewal went away, they would be paying less taxes. It is another division of taxes because the way measures 4750 and 5 were implemented, the assessors and the Department of Revenue decided that because of the statutory limitations on the general government taxes and schools taxes, that had to be spread throughout the city. So it's a two-step process. The assessor will look at all the properties within the urban renewal area and determine the amount of taxes that should go to the urban renewal agency. And let's say those are $20,000. The assessor then takes that number and spreads that out to every property tax bill within the city and divides those taxes so that all the taxing districts get a little less money. Urban renewal gets their money. The tax bill remains the same at the bottom, whether or not there was urban renewal. It's really confusing to explain. I'm sure you probably get calls from people when their property tax bills come out asking. I know assessors' offices do, but that is the reason. A lot of times a handout helps to help people explain how that works. I do have a handout on my website. If any of you want to look at that I can send to staff that shows kind of on a house by house basis how that works and why.
So it spreads out completely over the whole city.
It does.
That's interesting because the only affected areas that we're capturing that is within the urban renewal
Right.
itself.
And the only place you can do projects is within the urban.
That's right.
area.
So if a house was, if that line item's on their tax bill, is it zero?
Because of the division of taxes, it has, the urban renewal amount has to come from every property within your city.
The measure
Because of,
47,
yeah,
5 and 50, and 5 and 50 are with. We want property tax reform, and that's why
Right.
we're trying to,
right.
yes, get that going.
So I'll give another little backstory to that.
Mhm.
After those were adopted, urban renewal, the way it was calculated didn't change. And Shiloh Inn sued the city of Portland and the Portland Development Commission and said that urban renewal had to either come under the $10 per thousand for general government or the $5 per thousand for education because of measures 47 and 50. And the court system, it went to the Oregon Supreme Court, and the court system agreed with them that because voters had established those limits, any taxes that weren't general obligation bonds had to be within those two limits. And so the assessors and the Department of Revenue decided the only way to do that was to spread it out citywide. So don't try to explain that to anybody unless you have a handout and you use the handout to do it.
We're not increasing their property, it's only the affected areas. So that is odd.
It doesn't increase their taxes and the only thing to try to explain that to people is if urban renewal went away tomorrow, your tax bill is going to be the same, but these other agencies are going to get that money that urban renewal now gets, and it'll be divided amongst them.
That makes sense.
Elaine, I have a question.
Yes.
My question is, so who or how do we decide what parts of our city are in the urban renewal area? And how often or how do you update that based off of the city changing?
That's a good question. The city council of St. Helens, decided when you adopted the plan what that boundary area was. And that boundary area is not easy to change. You can add 1% of that boundary area by a minor amendment by your agency. So that's easy. You can do that by a resolution. But if you want to add any property that's over 1% of your original property, it has to be what's called a substantial amendment to your plan. And that's done through a lengthy process of reestablishing blight, redoing all your financial projections, taking it to your agency, your planning commission, sending it to all the taxing districts, having a hearing in front of city council that's noticed to everybody within the city. So it can be done up to 20%, but it's not an easy process. It's a lengthy process. And you may never add more than 20% of your original acreage to an urban renewal area. Even if you remove some acreage, it's not fungible. You can't backfill that acreage you removed. So if you had 100 acres, you can never have more than 120 acres, irregardless of what you remove.
Okay.
So this just shows, I always put this up because people visually understand things differently. So this just shows that frozen base amount, that is the total assessed value at the time an area is adopted. And the taxes off that go to the taxing districts. And then that gray shows the increment, which is the money that comes to the agency that you're allowed to spend. You can see in the early years, that starts off pretty slowly, and that's because that's only on that 3% growth of assessed value that our property taxes are allowed to increase. And as it goes up, that 3% next year is 6% plus some, and then 9% plus some. And then you get a new development, and then that will make it go up a little.
Significantly,
Right.
the whole amount
Right,
of that value of that new development.
right.
That's why, sorry, I was just saying, when we can work our way out of this, what we have going on is, because that urban renewal feeds itself pretty much.
It does.
Yes.
And the goal is to provide that incentive for development to happen, to improve things within your community, to do those projects that need to be done. Hopefully that assessed value grows more than it would have if you weren't able to do any of those projects. And when your urban renewal area ends, all of that increased property tax revenue gets redistributed back to all the taxing districts. So when urban renewal terminates, all of that assessed value goes back onto the property tax rolls for all of the different taxing districts to enjoy or to provide services with.
And so at the time, because I was able to adopt this, we had all the taxing agencies were 100% with the whole plan, because we had it in 3 different phases. And they said, do it all for the $62 million maximum indebtedness. So that was the school district, fire districts, the county, everybody. So it's pretty easy to pass.
What's the length on this?
25 years or to maximum indebtedness, right? 25 to 30.
I do not remember. I think your projections were based on 30 years, but I could be wrong. Do you remember?
Yeah, we have future projection slides that show when it will sunset, when we
Okay.
reach maximum
Okay,
indebtedness.
so that.
We'll talk about it.
So typically, urban renewal areas last between 25 and 30 years. On any new plan that I write, I try to restrict it to no longer than 30 years. I don't have ultimate say. I just am a consultant who tries to guide, right? Sometimes it lasts a little longer than that to pay off debt, but when we write plans, we try to make it so that they terminate at the end of 30 years. And again, time period is not a requirement of ORS 457, but the maximum indebtedness is, and that area ends when you've reached that maximum indebtedness. And what happens after urban renewal, and that's what I talked about on that last slide, is that increased value of the area is returned to the tax rolls, and all taxing jurisdictions benefit from that. And the area is improved and better serves the citizens of the community. So you've been able to do projects or facilitate development, cause development to happen that's better for your entire community. We do have a best practices manual. I helped write this manual. It was originally written by the AORA, which was an Association of Oregon Redevelopment Agencies. They've now merged with OEDA, which is Oregon Economic Development Association. And this best practices manual, it is divided nicely on forming an urban renewal agency, developing a plan, implementing a plan, and closing an agency. And how to make amendments to the plan in sections. You have a link to this on your website. It's really informative. So it is much easier to read than the statute is. The statute is in legalese and it's really hard to understand. And some, you know, I can tell you how hard it is. I've been doing this for almost 20 years and I carry the statute with me because it's so hard to understand and I have different things highlighted and I go back to it daily to try to make sure I know exactly what I'm saying when I answer questions. But the best practices manual is written for people to understand and city councilor members and urban renewal agency members to be able to understand. So it is a resource that you have that tells you how urban renewal works and what some of the best practices are. So it sometimes gives guidance if there's a question that there hasn't been a legal interpretation on what the statute says, but there's some guidance on, well, we think this means this. So it gives that best practice information. So it is really helpful, especially for agency members who are new to be able to use as a resource when you're trying to do things. Clearly, it doesn't tell you how to do everything, but it gives you enough guidance to know if and when you need help, to go seek help, but to understand the basics of how urban renewal works. And I'm happy to come back up after the rest ends if you have more questions.
Yeah, Jenny and I are going to take the next section and Gloria's going to chime in on finance a little bit later in the presentation here, but the next section here is just to kind of revisit the adoption process, how we got here, really the adoption process, the agency goals, and then the projects list, because a lot of the financing is driven off projects that were selected to be, projects that produced tax growth and increment investment and accelerated our community to achieve the goals. So this is a timeline, and started this back in 2016 and adopted it in 2017. There was a pretty robust series of community engagement, open houses, advisory committee meetings, outreach to the taxing districts. We had, they were all here. They're sitting around tables, looking projects, moving blocks around on buildings and different things. And but this isn't the first time the city has looked at using urban renewal agency or tax increment financing as a tool. Back in 2008, kind of in the throes of the recession, we had a plan that was all the way queued up, ready to adopt, and then unfortunately, council had the good sense to put the brakes on that and stop and just kind of coast through, because we were going through a real downslide in our losing 30% of our staff, and our budget was hemorrhaging reserves and things of that nature. So, and so we're glad we picked it up when we did. So.
Yeah, and if I could just add, so these meetings that say AC1, AC2, AC3, that's our advisory committee that was formed at the beginning of this process. And our advisory committee, as the mayor was remembering, included all of the overlapping taxing districts in our area. And just because you're hearing taxing districts a lot, there, it's the county, CRFR, C911. We had a superintendent for the school district. The port was there. At the time, it was the Greater St. Helens Parks and Recreation, which is now our pool district. So they were all there at these meetings from the very beginning of this process. And then we also held open houses. And I just point this out because this was a highly vetted and supported process with both the public and members of these taxing districts, city council, and planning commission at the time. So I always like to revisit this. I'm a planner, so process is important.
I remember there was a lot of good questions and it was open for public comment, and Laura, I think it was Lorelei, is that right?
Yeah, she was in the Northwest. Yeah, she's still there.
Yeah, so Lorelei and the crew, because we had her and her crew had great dialect and answered out every question that was thrown. And yeah, it was really good. No.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of my favorite slides. We reused this a few times, but it talks about the timeline for our long range plans and how long we've been working on the different planning documents that fed into the Urban Renewal Agency or the Urban Renewal Plan projects list. It's 2 decades of plans that fed into the final projects list. And one thing I remember was through our adoption in 2017, the consultants said, man, your projects list is really detailed. It's not often that we see communities that have projects lists that are highly granular like we had. Sometimes they get project lists that are really vague and not tied to a planning document. And so I always remember that this level of effort is why our urban renewal plan is set for success, in my opinion. Yeah, so there's the point of this is that there's 3 major long-range plans that inform the urban renewal plan. One is the corridor master plan, which you should be familiar with from 2015. One is the framework plan that dictates how the waterfront site gets developed. And then this other one that doesn't have a photo down here, in 2019, we adopted the riverfront connector plan, which is similar to the corridor plan, but just focuses on a different area. And so all of those projects are incorporated into the urban renewal plan document.
Well, if you guys don't mind me asking, I would like to ask Gloria, were you at Independence when they were going through this process as well? And was it very descriptive?
No, the Independence Urban Renewal Plan was adopted before.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was problems with that. They had unfortunately done a big project just before and finished just before the Great Recession. And it caused that urban renewal area to Urban Renewal Agency to go in the red. And it was a number of years getting it back out. Their waterfront development is what brought them back out of being backwards. And so that part was the success story.
Sure. And they were able to do that by return on investment, by showing
Absolutely.
why they needed to finish that waterfront and get it done because of the return on investment.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting close to that, where we need to start pumping that message.
Right, it was development agreements and certainly, absolutely, the first development agreement that they had with Tokola and getting the hotel project going, and then being able to do those infrastructure projects to support that development was absolutely instrumental.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's great. That's why Gloria's here.
Yeah.
Wealth of information.
Just to touch on the agency's goals, urban renewal, isn't intended to pay for all of the investments. It's a lot of times it contributes a portion of the funds, so we reach out, try to find grants and other matching funds, SDCs and things of that nature to kind of cobble all the financing together. So it's not the end all, cure all for getting all these infrastructure investment, but it is an important part of it.
And you can use any of your funding that you get too.
Yeah.
We tried for a big federal grant. Yes. Tried twice for a big federal grant.
I think.
3 times?
Yeah, I think we did 3 times to the build grant. So, yeah, if you want to tackle this one, slide.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's intended to be an implementation tool for our adopted plans, bringing our plans to life. And the goals are, stakeholder involvement. They're about providing adequate infrastructure, new development, and increasing safety and capacity, the transportation system, and in our situation where we have basically two economic development areas here, we have the riverfront area and also the Holton area has investments as well. If you look at the agency boundary, we'll look at it in a minute here, the maps, is that you'll see it basically creates a ring around commercial areas.
Yeah, and I would just highlight the second bullet point that providing adequate infrastructure and public amenities is its own goal, but the goal of the agency is to support new development. We want to invest in projects that will have high impact to the economic development system of the city. That's the goal of the agency, and so that's what these goals try to do. It's what is our lowest hanging fruit for attracting development and attracting investment into the agency. And that's partially why we move forward on our downtown investments, the roadways and projects that will spur development down here.
Biggest bang for a buck.
Here you go.
So the plan is organized, and you'll see that there's colors, and basically these are buckets of focus areas here, and there's categories. There's the transportation, open space, wayfinding, site prep and utilities, and then the administrative side of the economic development programs and some of the things Elaine plan updates, presentations like this, administration, that kind of thing, capture in there. So.
Yeah, so these buckets, if you were to divide them out into percentages of your maximum indebtedness, that's what this slide's trying to represent. The total cost of the area's contributions in the plan is estimated at 42.4 million, which is different than the 62 maximum indebtedness, 62 million maximum indebtedness, and that's because the plan contemplates interest. So urban renewal is built around taking out loans so that you can build those projects sooner than you would have otherwise. The goal of urban renewal is to make the investment quickly, attract the development quickly, and close the agency. We don't want an agency just lingering for years and years. So we take out loans to be able to build it quickly. So that's kind of the difference. You might think 20 million is a lot of interest. That is an estimate. We are, Gloria likes to point out, we're always looking for best loan terms that we can get. So we may end up spending much less on interest through the life of the agency, but this is an estimate. And currently our Business Oregon loan has amazing terms. Our interim interest rate is 0.6%. And we don't start paying interest until 3 years after the project is completed. So that's obviously like the best loan terms we could have found and will have an impact on how much interest we actually spend in the life of the agency.
So, that kind of answered a little bit of Mr. Toski's questions about where the debt is right now and, how it gets serviced is through this urban renewal. It's already had enough growth in it to service that debt. We usually do not look at leveraging money without the ability to service the debt. But we're there right now with the loans that we have taken and projected a little bit more for the waterfront, the trail.
Yeah, I think Gloria will touch on that when she talks about budget process for the agency to come to, is what that will look like when we're actually allocating the money to serve debt. So we'll touch on that at the end.
Yeah, but your point is well taken that, the revenue that the agency creates has to be able to pay the debt service and 120% of that debt service, so that there's a little cushion there too, so.
So the next few slides are just project examples. I think this one's an obvious one, so at the top, we have our project bucket, which is infrastructure. This slide should look familiar. This is the roadway improvements for South First Street, Strand, and Wapama Way. This is the, Riverwalk rendering at the Rocky Beach. That project is identified as a high investment project in the urban renewal plan. We have projects identified under the economic development bucket. That includes a parking management strategy. We hear about the demands for parking down here, and we don't actually have a strategy for how we're going to manage parking when things get fully built out. And so the agency can help pay for that parking management strategy, or maybe even a parking lot acquisition in some cases. It can also pay for master planning. So that slide is just to demonstrate that. And this is an Elaine Howard slide that we all love. So there's a project bucket for economic development, and within that bucket, there's a storefront improvement program. So this is an example in Astoria where they took Blight. They took a pretty rundown, underutilized building. The city offered them a low interest loan through their urban renewal agency and a grant of $30,000. And this is what became of it, Fort George Brewing, which hopefully you've been to in Astoria. It's a great building.
And I think this is a big one that we can start utilizing down the road, as this urban renewal. And actually vet them through, Main Street or Planning Commission, to find target buildings like this and be able to offer a grant and low interest to do. That's a huge improvement for $120,000.
And a low investment.
Windows, brand new windows, paint. I mean.
And then this slide's a little outdated, but this is our industrial business park. The urban renewal has a projects list for preparing for infrastructure on the city's property out there. Project Sprint could change all of that. We may not need the agency to spend money on something like this, but it's certainly there if we need it. So this slide, you're not supposed to be able to read that small print. It's just an excerpt from the plan. So pages 7, 8, and 9 in our urban renewal plan have these same exact color-coded categories. They've got a column with the project name, a description, the relationship to the urban renewal agency goals, and then an estimated urban renewal agency contribution to that project. This plan, the urban renewal plan, is on our website. Gloria will touch on that at the end. I'm also happy to print this if any councilor member wants a hard copy version of the plan. I know Chilton has one. At previous counselors have gotten it at orientation. We've printed out binders and then realized it just ends up getting recycled. So we just started referring people to online. But I'm happy to print if anyone wants to look at the plan in detail. Or
I might have mine shoved in a box too.
Yeah.
So then sorry. I was just gonna jump in since you mentioned that. So this is the detailed list. This is the work that's already been done and what is to be done. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, this is an excerpt from the adopted plan itself, and there's 3 pages of projects identified in the plan.
Okay, and can you remind me if there is a renewal area map in there from our city?
Great question. Yeah, I actually have it in the presentation as well.
That
Okay.
was my comment. What makes this a little, this information a little easier to digest, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see numbers right there, and those numbers correspond with projects to the project maps. So you can look at the project, you can see where it's at, and very helpful.
Okay.
Yes, so Chilton, you're just a great segue into this next part of the presentation. So that really complex process that Elaine mentioned for a boundary amendment, we did one in 2020. So I wanted to just touch on that for the new counselors that weren't around during that time period. So this was our urban renewal agency boundary. It's a little bit hard to see, but the black line is corresponding to the boundary, and everything in the gray shaded area is the urban renewal agency area. So in 2020, we were reeling from Armstrong closure, and our revenues were not coming in as projected. And so we were brainstorming ways to kickstart the revenue and get us moving towards the original projections we had. And so one of the things we talked about was this new apartment complex. At the time, it was in planning stages, but we knew it was going to be an affordable housing project. And so it wasn't going to help the agency at all. It was going to be owned by a nonprofit, which doesn't help with tax income financing. So we thought, well, let's remove that. And what projects are coming online? And we had a subdivision under development, or at least was close to getting planning approval, and we knew it was going to happen. So we added that into the agency area, which you can see in blue up here. That's Greystone Estates by the DMV. And then we also removed a portion of the former Boise White Paper mill site that has environmental constraints. It's mostly a wetland. So we took out some industrial property that wasn't going to ever perform. And then this last property that we added is a port-owned property that they went through an industrial readiness, site readiness process with the state. And so we were hopeful at the time that that would get developed with some industrial development, and maybe one day it will. So those boundary amendments have paid off. When we're going to look at some revenue projection slides for where we're at. But we're really grateful that in 2020 we had that foresight. So here's our current renewal boundary without the red and the blue. This is in the plan, so you can look at it in detail.
Dash lines are inset maps, so that's like the master map, and if you go through each one of those 3 maps will be, it's in the plan as more zoomed in level. So this helps tell the story of the we initially went to the plan adoption. We had looked, Armstrong Tissue was looking at a $40 million investment in that property at Armstrong. So we thought we would capture that property as well to get that investment on the tax rolls, kind of kickstart things. That didn't happen. Not only did the investment not happen, Armstrong closed. So it actually.
Thank you. Thank the urban renewal.
Yeah, it actually, we had almost no increment growth in the first couple of years there. In the very beginning of the graph kind of shows that little dip right there. And this is assessed value. It'll be in the next map will show revenue, but they're basically the same. The orange line is what we had initially forecasted, went through the 2020 amendment. The green there, that the line was adding the new properties in. And then the blue lines, that's reality there, kind of the blue shaded on, and that right there is what the impacts of Cascades leaving right there. So you'll see that dip, drop the assessed value down from that Cascades going off the tax rolls. They're just all their machinery equipment leaving off the tax rolls. So it is basically delayed the amount of time it's going to take to get there. And that, these forecasts are based off no
speculative.
Yeah, no speculative development. We're not talking about a hotel down on the waterfront. We're not talking about any kind of mixed use building. This is like almost a zero growth, very conservative approach that's just relying on the 3% tax growth of the agency generally, so.
So really, if we get a user at Armstrong, if Project Sprint happens, if the waterfront is redeveloped, that would expedite our forecasts exponentially. This wouldn't linger until 2056, which is what it's showing now. This would be expedited, but we wanted to have a very modest growth forecast so that we can make sure we can pay the debt that we have to service at a worst case scenario. You know, you don't want to estimate a best case scenario and then have it not come to fruition. So really, this is a story of the importance of industry.
Thinking of Hood River and what they did with their urban renewal and the way they focused it towards the waterfront, and it got paid off extremely fast because of the growth there. And made a huge difference in that downtown waterfront for Hood River, so. Just to reiterate kind of what you were saying, even this here could dramatically change that. You start adding industry and growth along the highway and Columbia Boulevard and upgrades to buildings. Big changes. So that's how urban, but if you look at the downtown waterfront in Hood River, if you're down there and you happen to say, oh, this is really nice. The only reason that is nice is because they had an urban renewal. It'll be the first ones to tell you that.
Urban renewal paid for all of the infrastructure within all of the streets, sidewalks, utilities within the waterfront area.
And Goose Bay and North Bend have done, both have urban renewals. It's been a longer urban renewal, but they've done a lot of work on their waterfront there too. I've actually toured a lot of urban renewals in my time being here.
So this graph here is just the updated revenue forecast, basically the same kind of scenario. You can see the point where Armstrong investment didn't happen, where it was growing pretty rapidly. You can see that growth curve, and then here's where Cascades just comes off, drops this back down, and kind of creates that just longer drawn out process until we get that assessed value back on the tax rolls. Again, at a very static conservative.
So now we're at what's next, and the last time we did a budget for urban renewal, it was a biennial budget, and it covered the fiscal years 22, 23, and 23, 24. The reason behind doing primarily of doing the biennial budget was because there was no anticipated expenditures. And that worked great because there was no expenditures in 22, 23. That was great. So we just segued into 22, 23, 24, sorry. And so now, as one go to the next slide, as we come into towards the end of 2023, 2024, we're looking at potentially a supplemental budget so that we can do some expenditures. And so we are anticipating having a supplemental budget before the Urban Renewal Agency on the 20th of March. However, we do have until till June to do that supplemental budget. So there's a little time for some discussion and firm up how we want to, if and timing of that.
It allows us the flexibility to prioritize what collectively between our staff and projects going on, just to.
Right, and then depending on the amount, if we do decide to go with a supplemental budget, depending on the amount of that will determine the process for the supplemental budget. We currently have all of the basically everything that is available in the urban renewal agency right now. Cash is budgeted in contingency, so we have the ability to do a supplemental budget and pull from contingency and appropriate it for expenditure. So moving along to our next budget, it's my recommendation to the agency that we return to an annual budget. And the reasons for that recommendation is right now we're in such a different economic climate. And it's going to make it harder to forecast for a biennial. And if we're going to start expending and then being able to forecast through that, I think that it would be more prudent for the agency to go for annual budget, at least for the next couple of years.
Makes sense.
And then, so the for 2025, our first budget committee meeting for the agency will be on this May 16th. This is the date of the already calendared meeting for the city budget committee. So the city budget committee also serves as the urban renewal budget committee. And will be a fairly simple budget. So we've only, we anticipate only needing that one meeting in order for the budget committee to review that budget. We will have included during the city meetings an addendum part of the document that shows the urban renewal, so they'll have exposure to that already, and that will be the lead up to that particular committee meeting on the 16th of May. And then the council or the urban renewal agency will meet again in June, on June 5th, to adopt the budget. And that is the same date as the city budget adoption is slated for.
But I think Gloria may make it perhaps in a slightly different way, is that all of this work has been, we've captured the expenses of this, the plan creation, the administration, and the portion of my time, Jenny's time, the finance director's time has all been fronted by the city. So, and we're, one of those eligible expenses is that we can reimburse, the agency can reimburse the city for those funds. And not only just the plan costs, but the ongoing administration. So a portion of all of our salaries could be taken out of here, put some relief to the general fund, and help the city budget out as well.
Did you say that was 20%? Elaine?
The 20% was in relation to aid.
Okay. But you said there was a percentage, I think, for administrative, like you can pay for yourself, no? Okay.
There is a number.
That's already in the plan and was already
Okay.
memorialized in one of
It's
the.
in the book.
Yes,
in the-
yes, it is.
The book already, okay.
Part of the original plan that was adopted.
Okay.
Concept. We just haven't done it because we haven't spent any money.
But we have a spreadsheet tracking all the expenses that have been related to urban renewal plan creation, Elaine's time, our revenue projections, all of those costs can be recaptured. Which again, John mentioned, helps the general fund, help support other services and other departments.
So we're uh, preliminarily proposing that we pay the general fund back from urban renewal for those front costs.
And that would be captured in the supplemental budget that we're talking about for 23-24.
Do you have, Gloria, do you have a figure in mind already?
We don't.
Okay.
Yes. So for, there's several requirements for urban renewal agency that are very similar to what the city is required to do. Audits, for instance, the agency is required to have an annual audit. Currently, because there's been no expenditure, our audits have been done is reports in lieu of audit. And there is also the urban renewal agency as a component unit of the city is also included in the city's audit. So those, the financial statements and the audit is also,
In that,
yes, also in the city audit. Then in addition, annually, we are required to prepare an annual report that reports out to the affected taxing agencies within our plan area to report to them how much we've received in increment tax, and also to report to them our maximum indebtedness and where we are at that point in time.
you typically give like an update on what projects you spent the money on? No, or just let them know the dollar amounts and the maximum?
No, we haven't.
You know, it would be kind of a good idea, I think, to say, hey, you know, we spent some money and it's been on the waterfront and,
Right.
you know,
Yes, we could.
yeah.
I have some input of that. I do annual reports for about 25 different agencies across the state.
Sure.
And a number of them do, it's not required,
Uh-huh.
but a number of them do have a section on projects. I always encourage them to do that because that way the taxing districts know how you're spending the money that otherwise would be going to them. So it's just a good way to keep them updated. So as you start spending money, letting them know what you're spending the money on and having pictures of that, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and I will plan on incorporating that for the next year. So all of these reports, we've already covered the budget. So all of these reports, as well as the best practices manual that Elaine talked about earlier, and all of those reports related to the urban renewal can be found there on the website.
This is our closing slide. So we've just overlaid the city of St. Helens mission with the urban renewal agency goals in kind of wrapping this up. You know, there's a lot of consistency with the city of St. Helens mission and the urban renewal agency goals. So we were just gonna open it up for any final questions while we have Elaine here. Urban renewal expert.
Any questions for Elaine? I just,
Hopefully, if you know more than when we started this, it's not more confusing than that.
I'm gonna let Steve ask a question. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Steve.
Mayor.
Yeah.
Just hypothetically, and I just want to make sure I understand this, let's just say we were to complete in a condominium development in the waterfront district in the next year and a half. And then that would go to market and then those units would be sold. Am I correct in believing that 100% of the tax revenue property taxes would go to urban renewal.
Yes.
And then as those grow over the years, at least for the time period of urban renewal. And as those grow over the years, then those continue to go 100% to urban.
Only to $62 million maximum indebtedness. That's the cap.
But we can, so. Anyway, it dovetails into some other discussions, but I just wanted to make sure I was clear on, and so that so if we can get something built and get that kind of money coming in. You know, there's a limited amount of time we can keep throwing fish in our boat, and then we're gonna run out of time. So the earlier we can get that money in and get the money coming in, potentially the better it is for us.
It's way better. Absolutely way better. Yes.
And
You are
just to
100% correct.
clarify, it's not, the reason is because its assessed value is 0 right now, because it's city owned.
Correct.
It's city, yes, I just wanted to
Yeah,
clarify.
I thought that's kind of like
Yeah.
I got a lot of ideas that are swimming around in my head, and this is something that I wanted to clarify before I spilled some.
And just regular house builders, build in developments. There's very few developers out there that build a big street and put the sewer and water.
Right.
There's a lot of builders. So us putting in the infrastructure is hopefully sparking this development.
It's wonderful when a plan comes together.
Yes. I just think urban renewal is there is so much to read in that booklet, and little buckets that you can utilize at our fingertips as an urban renewal agency. And allow other agencies, maybe throughout our city, to help vet some of those projects, like this target certain buildings that you wanna see upgrades to. You know, there's been talks just about and we plan on moving forward in some form of abandoned storefronts, you know, good things, really good things, so.
One of the things in the project list is facade improvement programs. It doesn't really specify exactly what that looks like, but it's the city's ability to, or the agency's ability to assist with.
And I think that bucket had like a couple million total in it or something like that.
Yeah.
They have little dollar amounts with them too, right?
I would love to manage a program that improves storefronts down there. It was so fun.
If you drive through the city of Sandy, Oregon, it probably has the best storefront program in the state. And it used to be you would drive through Sandy and it was kind of this not so great town. And now you drive through and there's this architectural theme of the
Yes.
kind of the forest, the mountain. And they have a storefront program where they picked a few parcels to start with, where they had an architect come in and identify what were key visual spots in the city that everybody would notice and provide some incentive for other buildings to improve. And so they started with those parcels, but they do have even a design code now in the city that any new construction has that same timbered forest theme. So if you drive by the Dutch Brothers, which is on the east side of town, it even has that, and not the typical Dutch Brothers little.
That's funny.
So it's a great program, and those programs really do make a big difference in small towns.
How do we start those programs? Because that was going to be my final question, was how are we keeping our stakeholders involved and encouraging public involvement, which is our first goal?
We, as an urban renewal agency, could talk about this, come up with a plan, use a agency to either vet or vet them ourselves. I would highly recommend trying to delegate some of this to some of our boards and commissions.
Yeah.
And help do the vetting process, but we absolutely have the ability to sit down and have this discussion as an urban renewal agency at any point in time we chose, being chairperson. You could call it a renewal agency meeting. Chairwoman, sorry, Chilton.
I think that's great. I would love to hear how other cities have implemented the program and if they're utilizing like a committee of some sort where we are appointing people, or are they staff members? Like how is it being done?
Well, I would just add that the city has a history of a grant program that's been going on for almost a decade now with the CLG program for historic preservation. And so we even have our own grant contract in place. Like, we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel here. Our Historic Landmarks Commission reviews grant applications and scores them to scoring criteria that staff helps them, manage. And I think we have a really good program that's been well received in the community for historic preservation, and we could just apply that to our urban renewal agency. I think the key thing is making sure we have the revenues to pay our already obligated
Yes.
debt
Yeah,
before we move forward with an improvement program. And I think that will come out of the supplemental budget meeting, and then the following budget meeting, we'll kind of see what kind of cushion we have to be able to start new programs. But we've got to be able to serve what we've already started.
good.
One thing to consider as you roll out a storefront program is maybe combining a grant or a no interest loan together, because those loans give you program income, and that program income allows you to keep doing things once you've reached your maximum indebtedness. So if you have that program income that comes in, it builds up a little
Oh,
bank
gotcha.
for you.
Yes.
So even if you don't charge interest on the loan, or even if you wait 5 years before any payments start.
I've heard of actually cities having this program and working so well beyond the urban renewal that people are like, no, keep doing it because, it is city,
Because then you can keep helping the other businesses once urban renewal.
because it is taxpayers' dollars that you're leveraging and using. Yes, I have heard of that, Elaine. They're a great point. So, yeah, I just, I didn't know about already having that
Yeah.
historical grant. I will say that we've done a lot of planning and, we're gonna have to get together and have a retreat. This is Mayor speaking now. Just about our council goals and, coming up here soon. I know we have a lot on our plate. I know we have a lot of people, with budgeting and stuff like that, but we really need to look at our goals. And where we're at, probably also before the budget meeting, just to make sure that we keep our eye on the vision of what the citizens have asked for. This whole waterfront was a big project, lots of things around it, so. All right, any other questions for Elaine? We definitely appreciate it, Elaine. Yes, taking your time coming out here. I know that you are the expert. Like I said, we had Lorelei, who's really good too. Yep, but